Hello and welcome to the DIAS US election policy briefings. I'm DIAS fellow James Rogers, and I'm joined today by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author Fred Kaplan. Hi Fred, thanks for taking the time. Where are we talking to you from today?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Perfect. So perfectly placed in the heart of a US city
Right.
at the perfect time to talk to us about these upcoming elections. So let's
in the heart of the heartland.
Right in the heartland. So let's open with a discussion about the presidential leadership. You wrote in your War Stories column for Slate that President Trump knew back in January that the coronavirus was much deadlier than the flu, that it spreads through the air, that it kills not only the elderly but young people too. What does this reveal to us about Trump's priorities as a leader and as president of the United States?
Well, of course, this was one of the revelations in Bob Woodward's new book, which is the centerpiece of which is a series of tape recorded interviews that he did with Trump. And this is what he told Woodward back in late January. And the surprising thing about this is that until Woodward's book, a lot of us had thought that Trump just didn't understand what his scientists were telling him back in the early days. It didn't really make an impression. He just didn't know. What this revealed, he knew quite well. He laid this out to Woodward in very articulate terms. He clearly understood what was going on and then did nothing about it. I mean, that's the astonishing and really more appalling thing. And his rationale for this was that he didn't want to panic people. And history reveals that wise and proper and effective responses to pandemics, attacks, wars, anything that affects people's daily lives, is that a leader should be frank with the people. Now, there are certain things maybe you want to avoid. That there are certain things that might panic, but the basic outlines of it, you be upfront and you say, look, here's the situation, and this is going to be horrible. Now there are things we can do about this, and here's what we should do. And he did none of this, and that's his that is his great sin.
Do you think that's his great weakness as well? Do you think the American people realized that he wasn't frank enough, that he wasn't honest enough, that, well, to put it bluntly, there were lies that were told?
Well, I mean, honesty has never been this president's characteristic. Even polls show that even the people who like him and will vote for him don't regard him as particularly honest. In this country, we have a tradition of newspapers, especially the standard newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post. You're very objective. You're not representing a party. And there was early on in Trump's term, there was a New York Times front page news story which referred to something that Trump had said as a lie in the lead paragraph. And this shocked a lot of people because the New York Times, they had skipped to a new level. And I know for a fact that there was a huge, long debate by the editors and publisher of the Times, and where should we do this? Because there are other ways there are diplomatic ways to say lie without, and there are some people who thought, okay, the New York Times has jumped over the rails with this one. They become an ideological paper, but they said, no. Their view was this president is something different in our history, or at least our modern history. And we are going to be irresponsible if we don't call this out for what it is. And this was, I know in European journalism, you buy this paper represents the Social Democrats and this paper that's not the way it is here. There might be editorial leanings, but the news section is supposed to be straightforward. There's a separation between the news section and the editorial page. Quite strict. So this was a really new thing for the upper crust of American journalism.
A real threshold moment in the way in which the American press speaks about a president, because of course in the UK and in fact across many countries in Europe, you're not allowed to call a elected member of a party a liar in Parliament. That's definitely the case in the UK. So for one of the leading newspapers to come out and call the president a liar is pretty outstanding stuff.
That's right.
Now you mentioned
justified, I think, under the circumstances.
Well, that's an interesting point, and actually it links us to these differences actually between the way in which Trump is perhaps perceived in the United States, and then also across in Europe as well. And this leads us to talk about his more global leadership. How do you think President Trump has performed as the leader of the free world? As I sit here in Denmark, it's hard to forget these howling foreign policy and diplomatic errors like offering to buy Greenland or to swap it for Puerto Rico, I think is probably the latest thing.
He was kind of appalled that your leader didn't want to even talk about this with him. He just didn't understand it.
Well, absolutely. And so how have these gaffes affected him back home?
Well, look, one thing that I know that people, like I'm sure that Danish people tend to look at American politics in terms of Danish interests, or at least European interests. What might shock, or probably won't shock you, is that foreign policy, as long as we're not involved in a war and having a lot of Americans killed in it, foreign policy doesn't play much of a role in American politics, in the assessment of a political leader. I mean, at the height of the Iraq War, or especially the Vietnam War, something like that, it does. It does. Although it did even more when we had a draft, and therefore your little Johnny could have gone off to war too. It's not just the 1% of the population that you might not even know. I think my kids, who are now in their 30s, don't know anyone who fought in the Iraq War, for example, not personally. Whereas back in World War II or Korea, so that would have been unimaginable. Of course, you knew somebody who was over there fighting. So it's kind of it's almost an abstract issue, unless it affects us personally. So I don't think that had much effect. But in terms of, sure, anybody who follows foreign policy and who realizes the effects that certain aspects of foreign policy do have on our everyday life, for example, supply chain, in terms of the trade war with China, it's been as disastrous as for us as it seems to be for you. Look, I've been studying foreign policy for a long time. If you asked me right now, what is the foreign policy of the United States? I really couldn't tell you. I don't know. There's always been a tension. This is part of American history between, broadly speaking, American interests and American values. We talk about spreading democracy or making the world safe for democracy. At the same time, our interests require us occasionally to cuddle up to dictators, or in dealing with the Soviet Union, say, given that we both have the ability to blow each other off the planet, you have to make certain kinds of accommodations. You can't just blow off. That's part of the tension. But we now have a president who clearly doesn't really care about American values, who doesn't have any particular fondness for leaders of Western and Central, let's say Western Europe, who embody these values, and which used to be the foundation of our alliances, of our shared interests, and so forth. And he's even gone to the point of casting doubt on whether he would honor Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which requires, if one country is attacked, we all treat it as an attack against ourselves. This has horrible consequences for every aspect of life, really. And look, if you think America isn't going to come to your defense, and you're a country like Japan, say, which could build an atomic bomb if you wanted to, maybe you're now more likely to do so, because you can't trust the United States. If you're a country on the border of someplace, maybe you'll make an accommodation with the bad guy across the border, because who knows what will happen if something goes wrong. It's it's the president views foreign policy of the United States as what is good for Donald Trump. And I mean that quite literally. What is good for the Trump organization as a commercial enterprise? What is good for his own uh, ego? I mean, he's gotten involved in crazy, delusional deals with North Korea and a friendship with Putin on the notion that he's going to win the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, I'm not being at all facetious about this. This is how the guy thinks, and he ignores U.S. intelligence. Now, U.S. intelligence is not always right, and some of the best presidents have ignored their advisors, but it's not that he's a great man. He listens to Fox News. He trusts what Fox News is saying more than what his own advisors are. I mean, imagine this. Imagine this. You're the president of the United States. You have access, I mean, good or bad, to the most extensive intelligence entity that there is on the planet. You can find out anything about it. If you're curious about something, you can get on the phone and call anybody you want. I mean, if the president of the United States wanted to have a discussion about, I don't know, Renaissance art, I mean, anything at all, he could call up somebody, or get so-and-so, have him come to the White House, I want to talk about this. I don't care who you are, even if you hate the man, you're going to go, you're going to talk to the president of the United States. And he learns everything he knows from Fox News. I mean, this is just, I mean, that's the one aspect of this that I actually don't even understand. Especially someone who is so curious about gossip and stuff, that you would think that he would tap the intelligence agencies for maybe all kinds of improper things, but tap them. He doesn't. So it's a policy that's built on a fantastical delusion about his own genius, built on information from the most scabrous sources in at least mainstream American journalism, ignoring his own advisors and intelligence agencies, and paying no attention to the traditional values and alliances of the United States. Part of this is he doesn't read. I mean, every president that's been a president in my lifetime, they read presidential biographies. They want to know, there haven't been very many of these people. You want to know how they've dealt with this situation, how they dealt with a crisis that's similar to a crisis that I'm facing right now. You call up every president since I've been alive, has called up his predecessor at some point and said, I'm going to go meet with so-and-so. What was your experience like with him? Or something like that. And it's a little club. You cooperate regardless of party. He has done none of this. He thinks that he doesn't need to. He is, I said in a recent column that he's not just a narcissist, he's kind of a solipsist. It's as if in his mind, nobody else even exists. He is the year zero of American politics. What happened before, what other presidents have done, what the nation has done in the past, he is not interested in it. He thinks it doesn't apply to him, that he is sui generis, what the rest of the country is, except to the extent that it's an obstacle or an impediment to what he wants to do. Doesn't matter. Look, he just recently, there have been all these fires in California, just ravaging fires. He announced yesterday, or he announced on Friday, October 16th, or maybe it was the day before, that he wasn't going to, California had put in a request for federal funding, emergency funding. This is pro forma. Presidents always honor this in cases of natural disasters. He said no. He changed his mind when the governor of California called him and kind of begged for it. But he fundamentally does not believe that states that didn't vote for him are a legitimate part of the United States of America, entitled to the same kind of treatment that the states that did vote him for. He views everything as transactional. And the common denominator of his transaction is whether you're good for Donald Trump or not good for Donald Trump. I'm not painting a caricature in the least. This is really what it is.
So how is Biden different? You talk about how Donald Trump has perhaps broken apart alliances that the US has, or at least made allies less trusting. What is it that Biden brings to the fold that perhaps could be a reset for US or perceptions of US in the world?
Well, reset is exactly the word. In the sense that we've been talking about, Joe Biden is the diametrical opposite of Donald Trump. Joe Biden, was in the Senate for 30 some years. He was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that entire time. He was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a lot of that time. When he was vice president to Barack Obama, part of his portfolio was foreign policy, like it or not. So his watchwords on foreign policy, alliances is like the #1 watchword. Everything is to be done with allies. If it can't be done with allies, it probably isn't worth doing. Now, if it has to be done to protect vital US interests or something, that's another matter. But it's through alliances, it's through traditional alliances. It's with a focus on the values that we share with allies. So it's a very traditional approach. If he is elected, I think what you're very much going to see, if it's possible at this point, is a return to Clinton, even George H.W. Bush, Obama kind of form. I think the very first thing he'll do is tell the Russians, yes, let's sign this thing that extends the New START Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty for another 5 years, no questions asked. I think he will work through intermediaries to get the Iran nuclear talks started again, if that's possible. That might be real tough given politics in Iran right now. He will have whoever is his Secretary of State make a worldwide tour to assure the allies that, hey, we're back. And here's the thing, I think it will work because I think actually one thing that Trump has shown is that contrary to, there was all this talk of America as a declining power, and I think to some degree that's true, but the panic that is ensued from Trump's unwillingness to say and do all the traditional things about US commitments and alliances, I think shows that the United States still is a very powerful country, and that in fact, most of the countries with whom we've been allied in the past hunger for American leadership. I don't mean to sound arrogant or presumptuous about this, but I think it's true. There was talk a while back that people in the EU saying, let's build our own defense force, and they really can't. They really can't. Each country is not willing to devote the kind of money to defense that would take. NATO has always been led by a US general. I don't know how that power would rotate in a serious EU defense force. I think they realize that certain things cannot easily or quickly be done without US participation and often leadership. So I think if a president came along and said, hey, let's try to get over what's been going on the last 4 years, we're back, we're going to do what we did before. I think with most countries, most allied countries, there would be a big sigh of relief. And I think in terms of Russia would be annoyed because Russia's whole approach is, their whole goal the last few years has been to sow chaos, to sow divisions between the United States and its transatlantic and particular allies. I think China, to some degree, China is panicked by instability. I think they would welcome the stability and the predictability of a president whose actions they could make sense of. So yeah, I think you will see if he is elected, if Biden is elected, a huge and pretty fast change in the world's perceptions of the United States perceptions of the world.
Well, that leaves me with my final question, Fred, and it's a cheeky one, but who do you think is going to win the US election? And if you don't want to answer that one, then what issue do you think is most likely to influence this election?
Yeah, I've never been good at predictions, and as you might know,
Me
there are
neither.
studies show that experts, to the extent I'm an expert, are no better at making predictions than the average person on the street. So the polls do show Biden way ahead, but the polls in 2016 also showed Hillary Clinton ahead. So not by quite as much, but I think the things we're talking about are not going to have an appreciable influence on the election. I think what will is, the ravages of COVID, and even people who are for Trump look at his blithe comments about it and detect a disconnect. Most people know someone who died or was seriously hospitalized with this, and to just blithely say, "Oh, it's over, it's nothing," strikes him as a discordance there. I think a major thing is his tone and attitude toward women. The gender gap in the polls is astonishing. I mean, he has the support of maybe 30% of women. I mean, it's you can't win an election with that sort of thing. So I think what will, and also the economy. He can say everything's going great, but it's not. So it's the kinds of things that people feel personally that will, and just it's a certain embarrassment about his cynicism and his belligerent tone and toward and incivility. I think it's that kind of thing, and the sharp contrast in all these respects with Biden, who is, whatever else you think of him, is generally accepted as being a decent guy. I mean, and it seems to be authentic. There was this televised town hall the other night where Biden was on one network, Trump was on the other. Biden, he's going on for an hour and a half. He stays there off camera and keeps talking with these people for another 45 minutes. So it's that kind of thing more, I think, than any particular issue, and certainly more than any foreign policy issue.
Well, the American people have a decision to make, one that's not going to only affect US domestic politics, but like you say, the rest of the world as well. Thank you so much for taking the time just to giving us a little insight into what is to come. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.